Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway on this Tuesday. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend. Noah C. Rothman joined me from his New Jersey headquarters of Noah C. Rothman International, where he is the senior editor of National Review. Noah, I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend.
I absolutely did. I hope you had the same.
We did. Noah, on May 1st, Donald Trump issued an executive order directing the Corporation for Public Broadcast to end funding for NPR and PBS. I worked for PBS for 10 years, from 1992 to 2002, doing the nightly news in LA and doing a national show for them. But that was back in the early days of cable when they still had a mission. NPR sued the president today. Your thoughts on this latest controversy?
My thoughts are nowhere near as well developed as my colleague, Dan McLaughlin, over at National Review, who has written about that, and I commend it to your attention. The lawsuit it has within the language of the lawsuit this contradictory argument that is made by NPR and its supporters. Routinely, it is that NPR's funding from public enterprises, from the government, from taxpayers, is so minimal, it makes up such a marginal portion of its operating budget, that there really is very little point to stripping it of that largesse. At the same time, however, if you were to do so, it would throttle Americans' access to news generally, because it would result in the closure of small NPR affiliates who subsist on these federal taxpayer dollars. And so you would get a lot of layoffs and you get a lot fewer stations, and Americans would exist in a news desert where they cloister themselves on YouTube and TikTok, consume disinformation, and then sacrifice the republic. Fundamentally, this is where the argument goes. It gets very cyclical and very hyperbolic quickly. I don't find them. I'm not an attorney. I can't speak to the merits of the legal case necessarily, but I don't find that argument compelling. And it certainly is justified that the Trump administration and any Republican administration, because this isn't a Trump initiative, this isn't a MAGA initiative, this is something Republicans have sought since I've been aware of Republican policy preferences, that they have a legitimate argument to the notion that viewpoint discrimination on these outlets is naked, obvious, and runs contrary to the Constitution's protections against that sort of preferential treatment. I think the arguments made by Republicans are the better arguments. The courts may disagree, but I would be surprised, frankly, based on my reading of this, very preliminary reading of this lawsuit.
Now, my couple of points with you, Noah. You're right about the news desert fallacy. That might have been the case in the early 60s when PBS got started, that Sesame Street was useful and it was only available on over-the-air broadcast channels that PBS would be subsidized by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. NPR did All Things Considered in the morning, and people were driving back in the desert. Now there are a million choices. No one has to get their news from NPR or PBS. But as to viewpoint discrimination, I will end my segment with you in 4 minutes, and I will do an ad. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been supporting myself on a Hugh Hewitt show for 30 years because advertisers want to advertise with me. I get no money from the government. It seems to me prima facie case that if there are private radio stations operating and the left-wing people are getting the money, the viewpoint discrimination is against me and my colleagues on the center, right, and conservative side. I don't want to hear that from them because it's absurd. They're subsidized by the government, and I'm not.
Yeah, precisely. You're talking about a category error. And then we quickly move away from the point you just make, if you're arguing with people who support public funding for NPR and PBS, to the point you made previously, the Sesame Street case, right? As though this programming, very public-oriented, public-facing, salutary, I would say as much, is just absolutely vital to the national conversation, and it has to be subsidized, otherwise certain Americans won't get it. You still hear the Sesame Street argument being made by these people as though it's 2012. It's not 2012 anymore. Sesame Street is a property that is, last I checked, owned by Netflix, which is a subscription service, which you have to shell out your own money in order to access. It's just
Yep.
the talking points have not evolved with the evolving media landscape, and the landscape has been evolving very rapidly over the last 15, 20 years. And it's time for America's conception of what media is and what should be promoted and perhaps even enjoy federal subsidies. I don't think anything should, but you can have that, or you can make a good faith argument in that realm. But the argument that is being made that these properties, these ancient storied properties like Sesame Street that we should all be deferential to, would not exist but for public support is just outdated. It's a fallacy.
Well,
It
not
doesn't
only
need to
that,
be engaged.
there are other documentarians than Ken Burns. They are in the business of making money on top of money, and they are in the business of exploiting their ties to the emotional upbringing. There's hardly a parent out there that hasn't used Sesame Street as an introduction to television for their child, but it is dated and it's wrong, and I hope that they lose. What about Harvard, Noah, which has also sued the president over the cutoff of federal funds?
Yeah, so I'm of mixed emotions on this one. I think Harvard is getting what it asked for. Um, a lot of these funds are dedicated to research, medical research, scientific research, and I think medical and scientific research is good. The degree to which this administration has tried to make a test case out of Harvard, again, I think they've asked for it. I think they deserve it. However, I also see this as retributive, excessive. I would hate to see this from a Democratic administration coming after a college that, for example, has religious affiliations or is explicitly conservative in its approach. Even most of those don't take public funds, so they're not exposed as Harvard is. Nevertheless, I see this as an effort to execute political retaliation against a political adversary and make an example of them. And I think that's really sordid. It's not the sort of thing I want to see from the federal government. I think they had a really good case against Harvard and Columbia when it comes to the anti-Semitism EO and the extent to which the behaviors that were captured by that EO and are being aggressively prosecuted either in the justice system or elsewhere. Totally valid and 100% asked for. This, however, going after, for example, federal or foreign students, as though that's part of Harvard's conception of itself, it really isn't. But we shouldn't be criminalizing that process or creating disincentives to import the best and brightest from abroad because we want that. We want that human capital. And this is the sort of thing that can put downward pressure on that. And as a result, our economic activity, productivity, and growth. I don't want to see that either. So there's a tender balance that needs to be maintained here, and I don't think the administration has struck it.
Part of the argument back I got over the weekend from people on the foreign students is that half of Harvard's foreign students are Chinese Communist Party affiliated, and that I should dig into that, but we will do that later. Noah C. Rothman, thank you